doing things in the right sequence. Okay, here we are at Juneau Gastineau Rotary Club on March 25th. And my name is Amy Lujan, and I'm here to introduce our Senator Natasha von Imhof, who has been in the Senate for, I think, about 7 years now. And she has definitely taken a leadership role in the area of finance. So we're pleased to welcome her to give us an update on financial and other topics going on in the state legislature. Welcome.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Gastineau Rotary. I really appreciate being here today. I think I was telling Dan this morning, I was a Rotarian here in Juneau for a couple of years. Back in the mid-90s, I was in the Glacier Valley Rotary. And so Juneau got my Rotary start, and then I moved back to Anchorage in 98, and I was in Anchorage South Rotary for, I think, 8 years until children sometimes precludes me being able to go to a meeting every week. And so I stepped back from Rotary. But I think someday, my kids are in college now. I have a freshman in college and a senior in college. So maybe Rotary is going to call me again. So thank you for this slide deck, for putting this up. Let's go to the next slide. Now, I struggled with whether to keep this a basic slide deck, which is what I've done. But I'm going to add the American Recovery Act money. We're just now starting to talk about it. It's very material, but just taking a broader look right now, both bodies are now organized, but they're very thin margins, meaning the House oscillates between 21, 20, 19, whether it's a majority, whether two people refuse to participate in any way. You kind of see Guarantar, Sarah Rasmussen kind of going in and out of the majorities or minorities. That poses to be a problem because if you saw the other day, they couldn't adopt uniform rules, which is the basic, like we agree to abide by these rules on the floor, and they couldn't adopt those. It's the first time, not only in the state's history, but even in the territorial history that this has ever happened. And so how that's going to play out in the coming weeks and months, no one really knows. Both bodies are working on the budget right now. The governor presented a budget in December, but it's a starting point. The legislature is going to take it apart and build it back up. And then we got more information, and I'll show you that in a couple slides. The dividend discussion continues. The governor has asked for back dividends, statutory dividends, creating huge budget deficits, and I have slides on that. COVID continues to play a factor. We're meeting here in Zoom with the Gastineau Rotary. The Capitol is closed to everybody but staff and legislators. The good news is that they are vaccinating the legislatures. I think almost everybody in the building has had at least one shot. That's about 250 people. And so hopefully we'll be able to open up maybe this spring. I suspect we're going to have a very long session in and out throughout the summer. So we'll see what happens in the coming months. We are looking at extending the disaster declaration, and I put disaster declaration, or I should put it in quotes. There's whether we want to have a disaster declaration or whether we want to call it a continuing of some type of recovery. And the reason I say this is that the governor has stated now he no longer thinks there's a disaster, but recognizing, I heard the comments earlier, whether we have the food stamp benefits and various other provisions, we still need some type of document to allow us to negotiate or at least participate in vaccine distribution and receiving $8 million a month in SNAP benefits, and that's food nutrition. And things of that nature. So we understand the necessity of that, and we're working on that now. And then we just got news that the American Recovery Act, and that's the $1.9 trillion that the Biden administration just passed. Alaska, and I have the numbers here, is going to get $1.019 billion in cash. And then there's almost about another billion going into about 25 different buckets. Food, childcare, housing, health and social services in all sorts of different buckets. And the Department of Education is going to get a lot of money as well. All that money is going to go directly to the departments, and they will spend it accordingly. There are different rules with each of that money. Some of them have to be spent this year. Some of it can be spent in the next 2 years or up until December of 2024. The Congress is still writing the regs right now. We will know what those regs are maybe 45 days. So we're sort of just starting the concept or starting the process of, hey, where could we spend this money? Where can it go? And how long can we save it or kick it out in the future? So we're having those conversations now, and it's very, very material. $2 billion obviously is material. So let's look at the next slide. So the issue right now is that the governor presented a budget. He has initial cuts of 294 million. Some are real and some are phantom. He's proposing we take 6.3 billion from the earnings reserve account over the next 12 months. And it's not 13%. It's about 9%. He wants to pay a back dividend for last year, a full PFD this year. And then of course we have the regular POMV, percent of market draw, this year. That is a huge hammering of the earnings reserve account. And we have stress tested this, and I'll show you some slides of what it's going to look like if we go forward. The governor's proposing to set the dividend at 50-50 of the POMV going forward, which is half will go to government and half will go to the citizens. That's $1.5 billion each year going in the form of a dividend. And that's about a quarter of our budget each year. With this proposal, we're going to have approximately an average $1.5 billion of deficits every year. We have no thought of how to fill it at this point. And then of course we have a bond package of 350 million to fund capital projects. I'm going through this quickly, but we're going to take it apart and build it back up here. So slide 4, please. So slide 4, this is just what it looks like with our current budget. Now you see current revenue sources, unrestricted general funds at the top of 1.6 billion. This is a brand new number that we got about 2 weeks ago because the price of oil has been higher. We actually have more unrestricted general funds, and I apologize for the typo there, general. So we have total revenue with a POMV draw of $4.7 billion. Then you look at agency operations, debt service, retirement. We have 4.3 billion in expenses, and our surplus now is $392 million. This is before paying a dividend. But if we pay the statutory dividend, which costs us a little over $2 billion, you'll see the yellow line at the very bottom of 1.6 billion in deficit. So that's the governor's proposal at this time. Okay. And we're taking it apart, both bodies, the starting point. Okay, next slide, slide 5. Because here's what the argument is. Each year, we get new sources of cash, meaning oil revenue. Take this year, oil revenue went up right in the middle of it. And so we got another about 350, 400 million in cash. There's people talking about taxes. We want taxes. We want an income tax. We want a sales tax. We want an oil tax, increase in oil taxes. We had that initiative just now. Oftentimes we cut expenses and it frees up new cash. Or we take money from the permanent fund earnings reserve, or our last savings account. We've taken money from the CBR in the past. This year, I could put number 5, American Recovery Act. I mean, this is unusual. This is not what we normally deal with, but number 5 is, money from the federal government. So the issue that we have is when we have new cash, what do we do with it? Now, every state in the union deals with the same issues every year, but here's what they don't have to deal with. Let's do number 6, slide 6. Do we pay that new cash out as a dividend? No other state pays a dividend as far as I know. The governor has us at a $1.5 billion deficit if we pay statutory dividend. The dividend continues to drive the budget talks. But of course, it competes with, should we pay down debt? Should we invest more in capital projects, deferred maintenance? What about expanding broadband so all of us can chime in from Greens Creek, from Seattle, from everywhere in Juneau and Mendenhall Valley? Should we focus on housing? Should we put some money into savings when oil prices do begin to go down? And these are the choices that we have. And every state has to deal with the bottom choices But the dividend continues to drive the conversation with us, with Alaska. So the next slide. So what we're dealing with, and this is why we have razor thin margins in the House and even in the Senate, even with Republicans. Last year, we had 10-10 votes on all sorts of dividend amounts every year. We had Kathy Giesel and John Coghill were lost their elections. They were a small dividend. They were replaced by Roger Holland and Robert Myers from from Fairbanks and South Anchorage. And they were the full dividend guys. They signed the pledge. If we do a full dividend, we're $1.5 billion in deficit. So once again, do we cut millions or billions of dollars from the budget in order to pay a dividend? Should we drain our savings account, which is the earnings reserve account, to pay a dividend? Should we tax ourselves to pay a dividend? And we did let's see, the Governor Dunleavy hired the Tax Foundation organization, as well as Lucinda Mahoney, the Department of Revenue. And I have from May, they have these two big reports, and they looked and saw what would the working Alaskans have to pay in an income tax, or if all Alaskans were paying in a sales tax to pay for a dividend. It was hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in order to cover that. And most people in Alaska would be paying more than they would be receiving in a dividend, even if unless they had like 12 kids. It's a huge discussion that we still have. Okay, so the next slide. So right now, looking at the permanent fund, it is our nest egg. We take the 5% draw, and it's a POMV, percent of market draw, and it's about $3 billion annually. And 5% is the tested rate around the world for the last decades. Whether you're the Rockefeller Foundation, whether you're the Norway Sovereign Fund, whether you're the Ford Foundation, Gates Foundation, everyone takes essentially 5% and no more than that. If you take more than 5%, the fund begins to erode over time. I mean, you can't invest it in any more venture fund capitals, hedge funds, and so forth. It just 5% is the prevailing rate. The annual draw will begin to go down if we start taking ad hoc draws to pay large dividends. So, and I'll show you what that looks like. Let's go look at the next slide. If we follow the governor's suggestion, here is the earnings reserve account. If we pay the big back dividends and we start paying 50-50 dividends in the future, the earnings reserve account is gone by 2027. Now, this is just one modeling, and I have got scenarios here in front of me that I didn't want to bore you with too many slides, but I might be able to post them on my website. Whether we pay $1,000 PFD, whether we pay a $500 PFD, all these are ad hoc draws, meaning above the normal 5%. We crash the ERA when we stress test it. So this is the conundrum that we have. The dividend program is really challenging unless we want to start taxing ourselves or changing oil taxes. And even then, the changing in oil taxes, we're modeling that as well. Depending on the price, we're all over the map. And if the prices stay at about $60 or so, and if oil begins to transition to alternative energy, it's not going to be the savior. So next slide. So this is what happens to the total permanent fund. If we follow the governor's process or proposal, we get the blue, just the blue, and the total fund begins to go down over time. If we follow just the 5% draw and are very disciplined, it's the blue plus the orange, and you see that the fund begins to grow over time. And that's assuming we don't have a crash in the stock market, prolonged kind of thing. So the last slide here. So what we're looking at right now is trying to pass a budget, but the budget now is going to include what to do with $1 billion in extra cash from the American Recovery Act. And this is hot off the press like this week. So the budget now has become much more complicated. There's much more discussion. We have a caucus meeting today, and one of our members walked into my office and says, I know what we're going to do. We're going to take that $1 billion in cash and we're going to pay it out as a dividend, the whole thing. And I said, well, what about the deferred maintenance? What about all the things that I mentioned earlier? Oh, no. The people need the cash. So already, this is as of yesterday, we're having these conversations. And I do believe that Alaskans have received their $1,400 in cash. That was a couple of weeks ago. So there have been cash dividends, and that's of course on top of the $1,200 earlier this year, and then I think the $600 as well. We need to pass a disaster declaration, and we're still working on that to make sure that we do get the food stamps that we need. Keep in mind that I wanted to let people know, and I made some notes here. Normal SNAP benefits have not changed. So all those benefits have remained unchanged over the last year. What we're looking at with a disaster declaration is an additional 8 million a month of SNAP benefits. What we're hearing is some of these food banks can't store that much food at 8 million. It is $8 million a month is a lot of money for this state. And it helps, but we also have to be strategic because we have supply chain issues, storage issues, whatever it may be. I'm not saying that we would never not do the disaster declaration because of this. I'm just saying it's a challenge. We're talking about a new PFD calculation. I just don't see the appetite for that. I think if we polled every member on this Zoom call, you might all have a different viewpoint. And it's the same thing with all 60 legislators at this point. What we need is a governor that is leading from the top down with a realistic plan. We need a spending cap, and that's for operations. And that's for, my spending cap, I have a spending cap out in Senate Finance. And that includes the dividend. It includes everything but debt. If we don't have a spending cap, when we get new oil money, Recovery Act money aside, but if we get new oil money or we do have taxes, we can't balloon up our operating budget because those things change. They go up and down. We're very volatile. So if we have a spending cap that's nice and calm and predictable over time, people can plan. Education knows what they're going to get every year. Public safety knows what they're going to get every year. We can put the extra money into capital or back in savings when the money goes down. If you recall those volatile years of 2013 through 2017, when we went on what I called Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, and we had, revenue go up and then revenue crash. Had we had an effective spending cap during that time, we would have an extra $10 billion in our CBR right now, because we would have saved more during the high revenue years, and we would have taken less out of the CBR during the low revenue years. And then we're, again, dealing with the pandemic related federal funds, was the American Recovery Act. So that's my presentation in a nutshell, and I'm absolutely open. You can take the presentation off so we can see everybody again. And then I'm open for questions. I just wanted to kind of set the stage, and then whatever else you guys want to talk about, I'm available.
Dan, or I see a question from John Wynn. John?
Senator, where do you stand with SB 103, the MHS Operating and Planning Board, or any other legislation relating to the ferries?
So we had Admiral Barrett present to Senate Finance on that the other day. There's been a lot of studies on the ferry, and Admiral Barrett suggested another study or another board. This is more of Bert Stedman's bailiwick. And while I don't want to pass the buck and say, this is not my jurisdiction, I trust that Bert Stedman, Gary Stevens, and others know more about this than I do. I just want something that's what they said was predictable, as in you're going to have a ferry on Thursdays and on Saturdays. They said, just let us know. This is what the constituents were saying. Just let us know what days, what months, so we know. And to me, I was like, that makes sense. And I think that the state is always going to have to subsidize the ferry in some way. I don't think that we can just say it needs to be its own self-sufficient. It's not affordable. Whether we can have all the robust routes, I don't think so. I think we take the big ferries, go to the main ports, and maybe you take small ferries that go around the small islands or something like that. That's really all I can say on that one, John. I'm sorry. I don't have a lot of, I trust that good people who know what they're doing will make solid recommendations.
Yeah, I trust Senator Stedman too. But one of the primary things, our last last 4 ferries were designed by governors, and we have to stop that. We can't have that anymore. Thank you.
See a question from Milo?
Yeah, I was talking about the spending cap. There's been a couple of different mechanisms put forward. One is a constitutional amendment, which has issues, and then another one is some sort of legislative, legislation, which also, maybe isn't as enforceable. I wonder if you talk about the pros and cons of the ways to get there.
Absolutely. So we do have we have a constitutional spending cap in the Constitution now. Unfortunately, the rate grew too steeply, and I have modeling. I'm actually going to be doing a presentation on it probably in about 2 to 3 weeks in Senate Finance. And I have modeling that just shows when you have the CPI, which is Consumer Price Index, and the change in population, and this was done in 1982. If you look at it, it is so steep that because when you add those two together, the rate goes too high. So the constitutional spending cap is irrelevant. It doesn't work. There are 28 states that have TELs, tax and expenditure limits, which is in essence a constitutional a spending cap. Some are in the Constitution, some are statutory. To your point, Milo, yes, when they're in statute, they technically can be overridden. That is true, because we can override every year any spending that we want as a legislature, as the appropriating body. Those 20, maybe it's 25 to 28 states, they all have a sales tax or an income tax. So their spending cap is based on either one of those taxes or both of those taxes if they happen to have them, because taxes paid is a better indicator of economic productivity or economic activity in a state, not consumer price index, and not, especially when we only have one consumer price index, which is Anchorage. We don't have one for the state. And population, because who is that population? Do we have a bunch of kids that just moved in here, or a bunch of retirees that are not working? Who knows? And so without having a sales tax or an income tax, and this is not a plug for either of those taxes, I'm just basically saying, our spending cap rate is inferior. And so I'm hesitant about putting it in the Constitution at this point. So my bill, SB 75, I think it's 75, is a statutory with a 4 or 5 year look back, meaning let's test it and see what happens. And in the event that we do institute a tax, we should incorporate that as the rate, and then it might make more sense to put it into the Constitution. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, I see Kim Kiefer and then Tim. Kim?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your presentation and joining us this morning. You've been talking about the oil prices, and I have a question about how long our oil is going to last. I know that the numbers and the barrels keep going down. So how does that factor into your the projections for the revenue coming in?
That is an excellent question, Kim. What we have going on right now, okay, we have enough oil if we're allowed to drill, and demand is different. So let's say we have enough oil if we're allowed to drill for probably the next 40 years or so. The big pockets, Prudhoe Bay, Kuparuk, are dwindling. So we did pass SB 21 to get these little, what I call onesie twosies. little bit of willow, a little bit of pica. With the Biden administration, you saw in the paper, they said, nope, we're not giving you the permits for Willow to build an ice road. Now, there's a lawsuit going on because these permits were granted, I believe, under the Trump administration, and then Biden just pulled them. I believe this lawsuit's going to hit the Supreme Court because this is not just Alaska, but there's other places. So we've had Commissioner Corey Feige present to the State Resources Committee and says, all right, fine, we're going to pivot a little bit from the federal lands and we're going to focus more on the state lands, which has a lot of opportunity, and Hillcorp's doing that right now. So we have opportunity to do like 30,000 barrels here, 80,000 barrels there, maybe 100,000. This is per day to kind of keep us level. Okay, if we can get the state permits and the and we can control that, and if we can get the operators to come to Alaska. Now, price. Alaska is more expensive than Texas, and you have OPEC in the paper going, well, we might just make $2 billion or 2 billion barrels a day or 1 million barrels a day. We'll just decide what we want to do. That's a huge deal. And that will affect prices going up or down. You guys, everyone saw Texas and how they had this deep freeze. And it was because of a combination of using alternative energies and then not spending the money in the back to make sure that they were properly weatherproofed, among other things. And when wind turbines freeze, what is your backup plan? It's coal or diesel or natural gas. And you're seeing in what they talked about was, and I'll answer this in a roundabout way, Pennsylvania and all up and down the eastern seaboard, and with the Keystone Pipeline, there are governors and administrators there that are refusing to build pipelines in and around the eastern seaboard. So there's no natural gas going up and down. So the articles that I've been reading in Energy's Week, we are one more Arctic vortex away from another potential Texas-like collapse in any one of those states. So what we're grappling with is, can oil and gas for the foreseeable future, and describe foreseeable future, 20 years, 30 years, still be the bridge until we figure out how to transition to windmills that don't freeze up, that don't kill a bunch of birds, and that we can store the energy for long periods of time. Long periods of time is like a week. To store those energies, we need copper, we need cobalt, we need silver, we need, lithium, whatever. I love mines. And we need those things, and we need to have the technology so the batteries aren't like a mile, it takes a whole city block kind of thing. We need to have the batteries stored in a very small, compact space. That technology is getting there. It takes a while. So to answer your question in a really long way, we're modeling high, medium, and low possibilities for oil. It depends on politics, depends on alternative energy technology, it depends on, well, those are the two biggies. And the last thing that I'll comment on is, whatever people think about the Susitna-Montana Dam, we are now dusting off that project up in Susitna, near Willow, because it's about $5.5 billion. And that will provide about 60% of the energy to Anchorage, Kenai, the Valley, and possibly Fairbanks. And that's very material. And so if that happens and projects like that go on around not only our state, but otherwise, that will affect the demand for oil as well. So, Kim, I don't know.
Tim, do you still have a question?
That was left up for my happy buck over there, but just a shout out to Senator Von Imhof. Thank you so much for your service down here too. And I know you and your colleagues get drug around to the public paper and all that kind of stuff. But I'll tell you what, when you're here, you see the hard work and dedication, and I think we can all appreciate Senator Von Imhof. One thing as I've observed you, you may come in with an opinion and you really dig in and understand the information. I've seen you change your opinion based on facts and data and what's in there. And Alaska is well served by having you there. So thank you. And I'll make sure my hand is down.
No, Tim, I actually really appreciate that because I don't get that often. I was, at a community council meeting last night and I just got ridiculed because any number of dumb things. And there's a really weird blogger that lurks around the building and follows me around and takes pictures and has his phone down by his thigh and takes pictures and videos of several of us, but particularly me for whatever reason, and puts it in his blog. And it's just, when my mom and dad call me up and go, what the hell is this going on? And, what do you say about that? And there are days where I'm like, I don't know if this is worth it. But then there's days when I talk to folks like you guys, I'm like, this is who I'm fighting for. And I'm not going to give up. So thanks.
Thank you. I saw John Pugh with his hand up. John?
Yes, then thank you, Senator Von Imhof. I really appreciate also all that you do. And I particularly have followed your stances on the permanent fund issue. And it was a brave stance that you took. And I was glad that you survived your election. I know they went after you, but you survived in the primary and on into the general. So thank you for your stance. The question I have has to do with that. So we passed the bill on the POMV that you draw 5%. So the problem is that we're now operating. We ended up passing that, which was recommended by the permanent fund and all the experts and so on. But then we never passed the second half of it, which had to do with how we limit the permanent fund dividend. Why is it that the legislators are there can't see the logic that you can't have one and then you got to have the other. The other has to follow. Something had to be done on the other half. So I don't get that piece of it. Why we can't get there enough votes to get the second piece done.
I agree with you. And there's no shortages of bills that are bill ideas at least. And there's a couple bills that are talking about it right now. So the options are at this point is somehow with a split. So you have the full 5%. So it's $3 billion that comes out with the POMV. Should a portion of that, 10% of that, 15%, the governor's proposing 50, half and half, way too high in my opinion. Is there a dollar figure that we can settle on, a percentage split? That's the first thing. The second thing is, so now you get to see these things. I will put this on my website. These are stress tests. So this is a $1,000 dividend. And when you stress test, the ERA crashes. That's about $650 million. So rule of thumb, a $500 dividend costs the state about $325 million. So a $1,000 dividend costs the state $650 million. That's just your rule of thumb. If we pay a $1,000 dividend, we crash the ERA. Okay. So when we start paying and that's what this is stress testing. If we pay a $500 dividend, depending on the returns, the ERA is not too bad. So that's using 300 million in from the draw. Here's the other stress test. Doesn't look so good, right? So it depends. And this is stress test. When I talk about that, I'm talking about market returns. So we have a market return. If it was in 2000 to 2008, that's a certain type of return, or 2009 to 2017, because the market goes up and down and up and down. And so a 500 is doable. Okay. Now, when I put in a $500, I'm like, okay, everybody, we're going to do $500 in a PFD, then it's going to grow over time. That's not high enough. That's not high enough, Senator. My people need this. They are starving. My people, this is any senator. They need it for food. They need it for shelter. They need it for, incidentals. They need at least $1,000. This is the conversation we had about 4 days ago when we went through this is a 40-page presentation. I just showed you 3 pages. So we had 13 people in the room and we had a big argument. And we said, well, if you look at the math, we can't do $1,000, let alone anything higher. Well, then we need to tax the citizens. The people that work need to pay taxes in order to provide the $1,000 for those others. So we had the argument, we're not going to do that. That's pure socialism in many ways. No, $500, we can do that. And then we're going to do a very reasonable budget that provides value. I mean, education, all these things cost money. Education costs money, public safety costs money, Medicaid costs money. I mean, those are value as well. It's just not cash. So literally this was, I think last Thursday we had this conversation. And so I see $500 is a reasonable way that we could do this, and it will grow over time. So it'll be $600 in 8 years, maybe $700 and so forth. And that's the math that works. But many of my colleagues cannot get there, and they want to institute a tax to be able to bring it up to $1,000. And that's where the conversation begins to degrade. So I'll be curious. I mean, do you want me to start negotiating an income tax or a sales tax in order to pay a dividend?
No.
But that's where we're at.
Rosemary?
So changing the subject a little bit, would you care to comment on the financial future of the university?
Okay. Yeah. So I think right now, of course, the Board of Regents just, they accepted the governor's proposal. This would be the last year of the 20 million cut. Whether that is going to be accepted by the legislature remains to be seen. There's debate on that. I had Pat Pitney in my office about 2 weeks ago. Pat was positive in her outlook in terms of how the staff and professors and administrators and chancellors are handling it. She was very proud of them. Obviously, membership is down in student counts. I think a lot of people jumped ship. So I don't think that the university, I'm not hearing any conversation that the university is going to be cut any further. And I'm also hearing that we may not accept the governor's complete 20 million cut for this year, the last one. That remains to be seen. We also recognize the importance of the university in Arctic research, healthcare, engineering, things of that nature.
Okay. Do I see any more questions?
I think we're just about out of time too, Amy. So maybe one more question.
Well, I have one more. I'm just going to jump in. I don't know. Senator Imhof probably knows that I've been involved with the school business officials for a long time, K-12 advocacy. And I just see a problem with not having a tax because we've got unmet needs that are growing around the state. I mean, we're talking about crumbling infrastructure and, long-term support for our schools, and, projections that involve a flat budget aren't realistic because we're going to need more than that. So we've been advocating for a tax for a long time. And it seems like we need to take into account the fact that needs grow rather than shrink. And that's just, inflation. You've mentioned that before, and things that need to be fulfilled in the long term.
So Amy, I actually really appreciate that. And I think that a tax discussion does make sense to some degree for those points you just brought up. But right now, any tax that we do or any income that we receive becomes the dividend debate. And we've had to dip into our savings to pay out a dividend. And so our savings now is, our CDR is less than $1 billion, which is ridiculously low. And so there's a step-by-step process. Under the Walker administration, let's just do it all at once. We'll do a tax, we'll restructure the dividend. It just didn't work for whatever reason politically. We've got to get the dividend at or about $300 million a year. Once that's done, the dust will settle. We'll see where we land at about $60 in oil, because that's going to be about average. What are our gaps? What are our desires? What's the hole we need to fill? Then we can start talking about taxes. And to me, that's the order by which we need to do things, and put in a spending cap, because if we all of a sudden get, 400 to 500 to 600 million in taxes, woo, we just like do this big, Christmas morning. No. Be thoughtful. It's my opinion. Be thoughtful. over time. And if we do get taxes, capital, debt, deferred maintenance, CPI, consumer education, to your point. So that's how I see it at this point.
Great. Well, thank you. I'll stop the recording now and you can wrap it up, Dan.